Let's go back to the founding for a moment, because I've been involved in debates over the years about the American founding, and as you say, you've got certain people on the right, who'd be great advocates of the American founding. That it represents, in some ways, the best of even a biblical anthropology. You've got the insistence upon the Creator providing equality and giving us rights, and so on and so forth. Others, very skeptical of the founding as basically a Hobbesian project, somewhat mitigated by Locke and by Jefferson. Give me a sense there, maybe if you were back there at the time as the American project is getting launched, what would you contribute to that conversation, or how would you assess it philosophically? Jefferson saying, for example, we have a right to pursue happiness, I've always found intriguing, because he doesn't define happiness at all. That's up to the individual. You have a right to pursue it as you see fit. Where the classical tradition is hyper interested in what happiness really is. Aquinas devotes, page upon page to beatitudo. What is it exactly? Plato is deeply interested in it. And then by the time you get to Jefferson, well, it's sort of undefined. Just you pursue it as you see fit. Talk about the founding a little bit.
Yeah.
How do you assess that?
Yeah, I always get into trouble when I talk about
I do
founding,
too, right?
because people think I'm
Right.
un-American, I'm not patriotic, because I'm a critic of the founding, or at least
Yeah.
I would put it the following way. I'm a critic of what has certainly emerged as the dominant understanding of the founding period. And I don't want to confuse the dominant understanding, which is itself a kind of product of a certain history. And it's a product of the history, especially emerging out of the Cold War and the battle against communism, battle against fascism, which I would say didn't create ex nihilo, but read in a kind of exclusive way, or read out of that constitutional moment a particular strand of thinking, which was its kind of Lockean, individualistic understanding, sort of the preeminence of human beings as right-bearing creatures, which in the context, again, of the Cold War and the fight against fascism, you can credit an extent to which that was a kind of necessary, politically necessary development, but which really narrowed the understanding of the founding beyond what I think its actual complexity reflects. So in criticizing the founding, I recognize I'm kind of criticizing the way in which the founding has been interpreted by, for political reasons and strategic reasons, but it's not that it's not there. It was certainly there, and it's there in some of the most preeminent of the thinkers. I think it's there certainly in Jefferson, although Jefferson was complex, the Declaration especially. I think it's there in Madison's understanding of the Constitution, in which the Constitution is really designed as a document or as arranging a regime that will sort of create articles of peace, and will sort of put to the side questions of the good, because society already seemed too complex, and the assumption was that kind of predominant liberal understanding of the political order. What interests me, though, is that there were voices at the time of the founding, and they weren't Catholic voices. They were predominantly Congregationalist voices, so coming out of the Reformed tradition, who were quite critical of this dominant view. They viewed the Constitution or some of its assumptions as too privatistic, as not sufficiently attending to the development of virtue, as neglecting some shared understanding of the good. One of the critics of the Constitution says there's no provision for sort of national academies that would promote virtue. These get to be known, this basket of people get to be known as the anti-federalists.
Right.
And there has been some scholarly interest in them over the years, but I think they've, like many of the losers in these debates, they tend to get written out of the story. And I often like to, both assign those texts to my students and point out this is a legitimate part of the American tradition, right? This is our tradition. We don't have to sort of say as Catholics, these weren't Catholic authors, but they were drawing on a tradition that you could say goes all the way back to the classics. They were drawing on an older tradition, even though they were hostile to Catholics in many cases. They nevertheless still spoke that biblical vocabulary that we're talking about. And in that kind of, again, that Congregationalist tradition, even Puritan tradition that Tocqueville regards as the kind of true founding of America, there's a way in which you can read that tradition as giving us a kind of vocabulary. And when Catholics arrive, this is what the bishops are seeing. So Bishop Hughes,
Yeah.
I'm sorry, Cardinal Hughes, I guess at that point. This is what John Courtney Murray is writing about. This is what Orestes Brownson, buried in the crypt
buried
at Notre Dame,
Yeah.
right? And what they all say to a person is that the official founding of America is flawed because it's based on these Enlightenment, Hobbesian, Lockean principles. But there's a deeper kind of sub-constitution.
And not
And
a privatized thing where like we just discuss that among ourselves, but
Yeah.
really a public
Yeah.
form.
And they all use the phrase, America was founded, the founders built better than they knew. They built better than they knew. They were appealing, or kind of there was implicitly a kind of a widespread understanding that kind of served as a sub-basement to what was otherwise a kind of flawed philosophy of a number of our founding fathers.